Hi, I'm Sumbul Ali-Karamali, and I write books explaining Islam and Muslims. I've been asked questions about being Muslim all my life, and so I'm used to answering questions, both from a Muslim American perspective and also from an academic perspective now, because I have a degree in Islamic law. When I was on tour for my first book, which was called The Muslim Next Door, I had a lot of teachers come up to me and ask me to write an age-appropriate book for middle school and high school. These teachers told me, look, we have to teach world religions, but we don't really know anything about Islam, and there are not any resources out there, so please write something. So I did. I wrote my second book called Growing Up Muslim, Understanding the Beliefs and Practices of Islam, and it's an intro to Islam and Muslims for ages 10 and up. So for many people in this country and in Europe too, maybe the first time that they hear about Muslims is in a social studies textbook or perhaps in a news story. Now, this is a little bit alarming because according to a recent Georgetown study, 90% of news stories featuring Muslims are in the context of violence. Well, then it's very hard not to think of Muslims as violent if you only hear about them in the context of violence. If we only heard about Buddhism in the context of violence, we'd think that all Buddhists were violent too, I think. So as for our social studies textbooks, they tend to treat Islam as if it were frozen in the 7th century. They don't follow the development of Islam through the centuries. My daughter's social studies textbook was full of errors and omissions and generally portrayed Muslims as backward and primitive and violent. This isn't really surprising when you consider that for 1400 years, there's a long historical tradition in the West, in Europe and then America, of viewing Muslims as the enemy. Medieval Europeans tended to think of Islam as a false religion. They thought Muslims were the Antichrist, demons, Satans. Muslims were often portrayed as having blue or black or purple skin. And Christian Europeans only really met Muslims on the battlefield, so they didn't know them. And there was a whole body of tall tales that grew up around Muslims. It was the European perspective. And these stereotypes are actually still with us. They're in our textbooks, in our historical narratives, in our art, our film, our news media, and our TV. Even middle schoolers often harbor these stereotypes, even young kids. My nephew was in 4th grade when other kids told him he couldn't play soccer with them because he was a Muslim terrorist. I was speaking to one 6th grade classroom when a kid raised his hand and he said, I thought all Muslim women had to be covered up and they couldn't go anywhere without their husbands or fathers, and they couldn't drive. So how did you get here? So the effect of all this is that Muslim children in American schools are bullied at higher rates than other children. Muslim American kids are 4 times more likely to be bullied because of their faith than kids in general, and twice as likely as Jewish American kids to be bullied for their faith. So it's important for teachers and those on the forefront of education to understand the students who are in their classrooms and to understand their backgrounds. So many teachers, no wonder so many teachers ask me to write a preteen book on Islam. Sadly, by the way, 25% of the bullying that's been reported on the bullying of Muslim American children occurs on the part of teachers. So it's important that we all understand each other. So when I wrote my book, I wanted to impart academic information in a way that humanized Muslims, which doesn't happen in textbooks. I was a middle schooler myself in Southern California, in California public schools, and I know the kinds of questions that kids ask and the kinds of questions adults ask. So I talk about what Muslims eat and don't eat. I talk about Muslim dress, if there is such a thing. But I also talk about the gritty stuff like jihad and if Muslim women are actually oppressed or not. One of the things that I mention is that 13 Muslim women have been presidents or prime ministers of Muslim populations just in the last few decades. That's more women presidents than we've had in this country so far. Of course, there are always going to be people who see others as a threat. In this country, there's a well-documented Islamophobia network that profits from disseminating fear and misinformation about Muslims. And so all of us, and I think especially teachers and educators, we all have a duty to really examine our sources and make sure that we're only getting our information from people who are experts in the field of Islamic studies and Islamic law. Because Muslims are Americans and Islam is an American religion. And I think it's time that you got to know us. Thank you very much.